Hello and welcome back to UnHerd. It's just over 1 day since the assassination attempt on Donald Trump, and here at UnHerd, both in London and in our newly opened Washington, D.C. bureau, we have taken a beat to observe the reaction, the impact, digest it, try and work out what might happen next. With me to try to bring some light on these tricky questions. How might it change the race? What should we make of Trump's initial reaction, of Joe Biden's reaction? How do we make sense of the complaints, the conspiracies on each side? We have Emily Jashinsky, UnHerd's very own DC correspondent. Great to see you, Emily.
Freddie, it's great to see you. We were actually here when the shooting happened on Saturday night. We just finished assembling some chairs and had the TV on, the rally on, and everything really changed in that moment.
Well, I just got to say, on a superficial note, it's nice to see a mirror image UnHerd studio pop up over there in the US. It feels like home from home. We've even put a picture of the Capitol to make sure people know where you are.
That's right, even though there's a little flavor of London here as well. But the events of the last couple of days, I think, add a new sense of gravity to what we're working on here in D.C. To bring all of UnHerd's readers and watchers and listeners coverage from the nation's capital during this historic election.
Let's start with that image, because that is what has been on the front cover of every newspaper for the past 2 days. It's been on every TV show. That series of images of former President Trump raising his hand in defiance, blood over his face, shouting, "Fight, fight," to a crowd that was so relieved to see him still living. I'm still coming to terms with what that image suggests. What does it mean to you?
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a really good point. There's something very surreal about it. It's sort of something you couldn't ever even write about Donald Trump because it's so Trumpian in every respect. You heard him on the Secret Service, or as Secret Service started rushing to get him, his podium mic was still on. And so you heard him saying, "Let me get my shoes, let me get my shoes." Clearly what was going through his mind, and he's since said as much. He actually even told Byron York of the Washington Examiner he wanted to continue making his speech, but Secret Service was rushing him off the stage. You saw the wheels turning. You kind of watched in real time as he, ever the man who is focused on imagery, was focused on creating an image of strength. And he was mouthing, "Fight, fight," as you mentioned, Freddie, blood streaking across his face as Secret Service helped him off the stage. And one key, I think, difference between, another time when here in the United States at a campaign event, we watched a president basically get shot in the head, is the volume of images that we had of what happened to Donald Trump. Doug Mills of the New York Times got a picture actually of the bullet as it's inches away from Donald Trump's ear, the whiz of the bullet as it's inches away from Donald Trump's ear. We have pictures of every moment. We have frame-by-frame video of every single moment. And Donald Trump knew how important that was going to be right away. And to some people, that's sort of a negative about Trump, is he's so obsessed with imagery. And to others, it's always been one of his strengths. And I don't know how you can walk away from what happened and say that was, for him, anything but a strength, at least in that moment. It's just amazing to imagine being shot at in front of the world and then immediately jumping to what it would look like.
Yeah, already his critics, although moderating their language, given the circumstances, are saying to say "fight" at a moment of violence is inciting further violence, it is giving the wrong message, etc. I've seen a number of BBC commentators say that, and I know there have been a lot of journalists in the US that have been kind of hinting at that. But for a lot of people, here's a completely anecdotal but I think telling little story, is that I have an 18-year-old nephew and he's sitting over here in Europe, and all he says he's seen on his social media feeds in the past 24 hours from all of his 17, 18, 19-year-old friends are badass memes of Donald Trump, with 50 Cent music, there are thousands of these memes coming up, and they're not thinking this is in some way a negative. The overwhelming image seems to be strength, pugnacious, kind of unkillable, dare I say it. I mean, it's something people have said about Donald Trump for a long time, that, whatever you throw at him, it doesn't stick. he's kind of unkillable, literally.
Donald Trump, unkillable in the Republican primaries when everybody said that he was going to drop out in a matter of weeks, that it was impossible. I think that's the best word that describes the image. And 50 Cent himself actually dedicated his song Many Men to Donald Trump in Boston, photoshopped a head of Donald Trump onto his own body, and is now reportedly trying to get to the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee over the course of the next week. Elon Musk immediately endorsed Donald Trump after this happened. And I think when the left or critics of Donald Trump start to suggest that there was something dark maybe about mouthing fight, fight, fight in that moment, we all should remember that a Pennsylvania man, a 50-year-old former volunteer fire chief, was killed in the stands. Those bleachers were smeared with his blood as he tried to protect his family. I thought the Democratic governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, had a really fantastic press conference on Sunday, remembering the life of Corey Compertore. And that's, when you hear fight, 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 and someone has been slaughtered, I believe 2 other rally goers were sent to the hospital. The former president of the United States, almost assassinated on the world stage. It becomes a more understandable instinct. And besides that, Donald Trump is also a human being, which was one of the interesting takeaways. I think he's such a character. He's such a persona that it's easy to dehumanize Donald Trump, to see him as a meme rather than a human. And I think everybody saw a very human response immediately to what happened, and to fault somebody for their kind of gut instinct after they were just shot at is a little strange too.
How do you think the president, Joe Biden, has reacted in the past 24 hours? Overnight, we had his statement from the Oval Office. He's trying to very much strike this conciliatory tone, the more statesman-like, talking about the need to cool down the language, turn down the temperature on the political conversation. Do you think that's gonna work?
He's definitely made an effort to be on TV, to be in front of the American people as much as possible, which is something that actually immediately after the shooting, a lot of people felt he was too late with the statement that Biden put out. This happened around 6 p.m. His statement didn't come out for, I believe, almost a couple hours, if not a little bit more. He was at his beach home in Delaware and flew back after the shooting, after giving his remarks, but he put out a statement, then gave very brief remarks from Delaware, flew back, gave 2 sets of remarks yesterday. One was a quick press conference, and the second was a very quick 7-minute Oval Office address where he did stumble with words. He called Donald Trump former Trump instead of former President Trump, and he talked about the battle box instead of the ballot box. But he's really, really making a concerted effort to look like the national healer, to look like a leader, to come out in front of all of this, to be in front of the American people as they're digesting it and grappling with it. But the big question for his campaign is whether or not this cornerstone, this foundation of their argument against Donald Trump, that he's an existential threat, is one that they can continue with, because people on the right have immediately pulled just about every example of Joe Biden over the last, 5 years, referring to Donald Trump as an existential threat. Democrats talking about how Trump needs to be eliminated, and really putting pressure on Democrats to take stock of that rhetoric. Now, I will say, I think the right needs to be very careful there, because when Sarah Palin put out a map back in, I think this was 2012, and it had Democratic swing districts under bullseyes, Gabby Giffords was in one of those districts and was shot. And people immediately started blaming Sarah Palin and the map. And this was actually at the heart of the New York Times versus Palin lawsuit. That was, it ended not favorably for Sarah Palin, but the New York Times did correct their story. This has been a long-standing argument the right has made, that this type of rhetoric is not responsible for insane people doing insane things. So there is something for everyone to kind of pause and think about there, especially on the right as they make that argument. But people, as a political strategy, are going to put pressure on Democrats to stop making that argument, because they know Democrats think it is their strongest argument against Donald Trump. I do not think Joe Biden can afford to drop that argument, and I do not think he ultimately will drop that argument. I think we'll see it stop for a few days and then come back maybe in a milder form, but it'll still be there.
Well, it was interesting that I think the existential line was still in the Oval Office speech. So he's making sure not to drop that. This is really the key of the heart of it, isn't it? That is it the case that both sides have allowed their rhetoric to become too kind of do or die, that the future of everything depends on this? If the other guy wins, he's evil, it's the end of the nation type territory, which is a kind of justification almost for those kind of extreme actions, or might be interpreted that way. That's the argument on both sides, isn't it? We can put up something J.D. Vance, the senator, was saying, which is that argument. Let's have a look. Today is not just some isolated incident, he said. The central premise of the Biden campaign is that President Donald Trump is an authoritarian fascist who must be stopped at all costs. That rhetoric led directly to President Trump's attempted assassination. So that's, as you were saying, it's a risky argument to make.
Yeah, it is, because, there are examples that people can pluck from. And I don't actually think there's a mainstream equivalent on the right. I think a lot of this is on the sort of fringes of the right, but it's actually even hard to define what is mainstream on the right anymore in a way that it's not on the left, because some of these major institutions, Hollywood, the news media, are really dominated by people on the left. So it's easier to say, Kathy Griffin is fairly mainstream, and she got pilloried for that photo. She got calls from Secret Service for that photo where she posed with the bloodied head of Donald Trump years ago. And so the right can't at the same time say, well, if Lauren Boebert says, the Republican congresswoman from Colorado says something that's reckless rhetoric, well, it doesn't count because, it's true. She doesn't have a primetime television show, but she does have a big platform in the Republican Party. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot for everybody to be considering right now. At the same time, I also think it's worth remembering just how Donald Trump rose out of the Obama era, in which people were reacting to these claims, again, of Obama going to Pennsylvania and saying people are clinging to their gods, their guns, their religion. There were became this very bitter tone from Hollywood and others about how Hollywood and the news media in particular, the two big institutions, although also academia, that people were bigots and flyover country in those states that ended up going hard for Donald Trump, like my own Wisconsin, which is why Republicans are holding their convention in Wisconsin to make a statement about places where you have a lot of Obama-Trump voters, where people reacted after years of being really dehumanized by media or called horrible names, smeared by media. And that's where a lot of this comes out of. It doesn't make it right from either side. But I do think that there's, especially for the left, something to consider how people are going to take a guy at a rural Trump rally being shot while he was protecting his family. That's going to resonate with people in a way that a lot of this stuff did over the Obama era, too.
Yeah, it's worth saying that Donald Trump himself has thrown a fair bit of strong rhetoric in the other direction. Let's not be kind of biased in either direction about that. Let me ask, you're about to go for us to Milwaukee, to the Republican convention. How long does this mood, this more sober, statesman-like, trying to be above the fray mood last? Does it even last till his speech on Wednesday? I saw he gave an interview to the Washington Examiner just yesterday saying he's going to rewrite his whole speech and a different tone is required. Is that realistic? Are we going to see a completely different Donald Trump saying, no, my friends, it's time to, I can't even find the words that I can imagine him speaking. Do you think that's going to happen?
The Catholic writer Rod Dreher had a fascinating column this morning where he put it like this. He said, hero or Nero. And he was predicting that Trump could either, go in one direction of hero or the other direction of Nero, just based on his own psychological reaction to, as you mentioned, Freddie, almost the superhuman, unkillable survival moment that he had on the world stage. It could, help him be politically someone who appeals to a broader swath of the public by, sort of adopting soaring, loftier rhetoric, which I think he's really tempted to do based on that interview he gave to Byron York of the Washington Examiner. He said, I'm not supposed to be here. He said it had to be at the exact right angle. And then, as you mentioned, he said he had a real, quote, rip-roarer of a speech, is how he described what he was planning to say at the Republican National Convention, but said now that he's going to do something, quote, more unifying. So he obviously knows that's where it would politically benefit him to go. But in the exact same way that we were just talking about how Democrats have been framing this election as an existential one and can't afford to drop that framing, Republicans have been framing this election as an existential one. In fact, they framed 2016 and 2020 as an existential election from some mainstream channels, not just random people, as you may have seen in 2008, 2004, 2000. This is in the same way I said it was a cornerstone of the Democrats' argument. It's a cornerstone of the Republicans' argument. So can you make that argument in a more unifying tone? That's what both candidates right now are poised to find out. And to your point about Donald Trump having, all kinds of insults at the ready at any given moment, that's also a cornerstone of Trumpism. That's how Donald Trump kind of charmed this big part of not just the Republican Party, but again, people who had voted for Barack Obama. He said things about Rosie O'Donnell. He went after Megyn Kelly. Some people really like that. So will they really like this new Trump? Yeah, probably. But it's definitely going to be a challenge for him.
It's going to be a matter of degree, isn't it, really? I think the fact that he has this image of himself covered in blood everywhere, his fighter credentials, his street fighter credentials could not really be higher at this point. This is sort of off the charts. I would expect he will try to do a little bit more, for him, a statesmanly tone in his speech on Wednesday. And let's just try and anticipate how that might work. For me, it's about what will he not say? So, for example, the internet at the moment is full of theories about the Secret Service and how they failed to protect him. That is self-evidently true. I don't think that's a partisan comment. It's just pretty obvious that you shouldn't allow a sniper within range of a presidential candidate who gets a clear shot at him. Obviously, it was the Secret Service failing. Will he mention that? I would guess not. He would choose to be more, praising the Secret Service rather than pointing out any kind of conspiracy or failing. Those kind of touch points will give a sense of the slightly more moderate Trump. What do you say to that?
I think that's such a good point. And the global media is descending on Milwaukee right now. So even if Donald Trump, for the next few days at least, is able to do that, is able to avoid sort of, and again, this will change anybody psychologically, being shot at like that and having your life, coming within, just millimeters of your life will change anybody. So we don't totally know what that's going to do to Donald Trump quite yet. But, the Republican surrogates are going to be hounded by media all week. They're going to be pressed on questions about Secret Service. They're going to be openly, doing their podcasts from the RNC, talking to every journalist from around the world. And whether they can match Trump's tone is a real question, because his campaign manager sent a memo urging everybody on their team basically not to, adopt rhetoric that was dangerous just after Donald Trump was shot, within 24 hours of him being shot. They're obviously aware that they have a moment to seize here. So I don't think even with this RNC, which is, gives Republicans primetime opportunities for 4 nights, basically, to make their pitch to the American public, it's not just going to be a matter of Donald Trump. It's going to be a matter of getting everybody on board with matching this moment, so you don't end up having clips bouncing around TikTok of people, kind of soiling what feels like an opportunity for the Republican Party with, maybe reckless conspiracy mongering that gets into absolutely crazy territory instead of, as you say, Freddie, there are some very obvious questions that need to be asked, but, jumping way ahead of where this could possibly go.
Let's just place that there as a little acid test in advance. Will he reference any conspiracy theory? Will he imply that this was a widespread plot against him in some way? That, for me, because the old Donald Trump would have had no hesitation in leaning into some of that. They've been trying to kill me for years. They're still trying to kill me. They let the guy come too close, some allusion to a deep state conspiracy. If he avoids any of that, I think that'll be a sign of a different tone.
I think that's a great acid test. And, we'll obviously see, because the reality television instincts of Donald Trump that we saw as he was getting up off that stage have extended to him reacting in real time on Truth Social. I think he's left some 5 posts at this point since the shooting, given interviews to the Washington Examiner. I mean, I think he knows that as a human being, there's something appealing about him reacting, with control, at least so far, to this in real time, that gives people a glimpse, gives people something to hold on to feel like they understand how he's going through this. But is that temporary? I mean, can Donald Trump resist the urge to bring the rhetoric from the soaring kind of lofty place down a few notches in the long term? It's a huge question, and it's one of those things I've always wondered about Donald Trump. Not worried so much as wondered that this is a guy who did charm the American people for years on one of the top-rated primetime broadcast television shows, The Apprentice. And after he was elected, I thought to myself, this is actually something that could be really dangerous for genuine conservatives, because he could come in as a total centrist who knows how to please people really on both sides. He'd given money to Republicans and Democrats and done all the fundraising and schmoozing before. And he could come in and just be the centrist hero that the media had always wanted. And maybe that's why they were giving him so much airtime in the lead up to the election. And he didn't do that. It was kind of, he started his inaugural speech was on, it was very dark. It was on American carnage. So do we see American carnage Trump going forward, or do we see a kind of morning in America, Reagan-esque Trump going forward? He has a moment here to be a cultural figure that's different than what we've seen up to this point.
Yeah, near brushes with death do funny things to people. I mean, look, we saw it during COVID with Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who had been incredibly punchy, a kind of populist, right-wing kind of leader, and then he got very sick with COVID. He was in hospital for a while, and most people observed quite a striking difference after that. He was much more cautious. It will be interesting to see. We'll find out in the next few days.
Trump, by the way, had COVID too. And reportedly wanted to do a Willy Wonka roll out of the hospital because people were saying having COVID at his age and weight was a really serious condition, and he was hospitalized here in Washington, D.C. for a good amount of time. And he again was very image conscious and actually suggested having a Superman T-shirt under his suit to rip open as he walked out of the hospital back then.
Well, that's the same instinct,
that counts
isn't
as a near
it?
death.
It's the same sort of genius for thinking what's the visual representation going to look like.
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
Let's just have a moment on what we know about the facts, about who the shooter is. What have we learned over the last 24 to 36 hours that we didn't know initially about why this young man did what he did?
Yeah, I think the big takeaway is we continue to not know much, which is actually interesting in this day and age in and of itself, because typically within hours of a tragedy like this, we see social media accounts, we see the long footprint of this person throughout the past. And so far, we've seen basically none of that. We know that people saw him climbing across the roof. We've seen videos now of people watching this happen, trying to call attention to law enforcement. We saw it. I mean, we can see it through multiple video angles. Bright sunny day, kid climbing on a roof with a gun. People are within yards of him and are shouting, trying to get everyone's attention because they're worried about what might happen. His classmates have said that he was a bit of a loner. Some have said, he was nice. We know that he was a registered Republican, that he donated $15 to kind of a scam pack when they sent an email about tuning into the inauguration back in 2021 when he was 17 years old. His dad's initial comment to the media was basically, we don't have anything to say until we know, quote, what the hell is going on. So I think that's actually the statement of the moment. Nobody knows what the hell is going on with this. So the big takeaway for me, at least right now, is that there is nothing to hold on to that might explain this 20-year-old boy's motive.
You haven't seen a lot of partisan attempts, either by the right or the left, to kind of frame the shooter as part of the political program of the opposition. Have you seen that? I haven't noticed it yet.
No, I haven't. And actually, I think to the extent the right jumps to conclusions that seem really obvious to us right now, and maybe even what I'm saying ages poorly, but I do think it's worth remembering that James Garfield was assassinated by a man who thought he was owed a position in the Garfield administration. He wanted to work for James Garfield, thought that that he had helped elect James Garfield and that Garfield owed him. And he was mentally ill and shot Garfield because he was upset about all of this. So when crazy people do crazy things, their explanations can sometimes be crazy, or could often be crazy, and don't neatly fit into a political box. So what we could end up finding out is that these questions about rhetoric and the heat of the rhetoric, which I think have always been reasonable, whether or not Trump had been shot. You could have had this exact same conversation on Friday, and now it's arguably even more important. But it could turn out that these things are entirely disconnected, and this person was just incredibly sick, and Secret Service protection was just incredibly lax for a number of reasons that we're going to find out in the days to come. But really, we just don't know, and some conclusions that seem obvious right now may turn out to be exactly what we thought they were, or not.
I can't let you go without just a tiny bit of political prognostication, Emily, because people will be thinking, what effect does this have on both Donald Trump's chances, but also Joe Biden's chances? Let's start with Biden. Do you think this makes it more or less likely that the Democrats swap him out in time for the convention?
I think it makes it more likely. And I think that's because it's going to have a dramatic effect on his numbers over the course of the next couple of weeks. I don't think we're going to start seeing it show up dramatically in days, but I do think the more that people send those memes that have been pinging around the internet of, Biden versus stairs, him falling down on stairs, and Trump versus bullet. That's just my description of one meme that I've seen so far, with Donald Trump's fists in the air, blood streaked across his face. It's a juxtaposition that highlights what even Biden's own team knows to be his natural weakness, which is his age, and that's why the debate was so devastating. And also because they worry that down ballot, a strong Trump showing will be really bad for their candidates if there's not a strong Biden showing. I think this is really good for Donald Trump's turnout prospects, that people are going to be more and more energized to turn out for this personality, this unkillable, to use your word, Freddie, personality that they saw shot on television in real time. And that's really bad for Biden, whether or not it persuades a whole lot of people in another direction. It certainly will boost.
You don't then buy into the argument, which I've seen, that it makes the mechanism for changing out Joe Biden harder, because whilst the Republican nominee is just surviving an assassination attempt, the Democrats don't want to be launching their own assassination attempt on their own candidate. Plus, the whole argument for changing him out is let's rip up the rule book, let's do something unprecedented, because the threat is so existential, because a Donald Trump victory would be the end of the republic, which is the kind of rhetoric they need in order to make that change happen. Is going to be much harder to do now. So you don't buy the argument that it actually makes it less likely.
I think it's a good argument. I just think the other argument is more likely, given that we've seen donors really dig their heels in and say we're not giving a cent more to Democrats right now because of all of this. And one reason, though, Freddie, that goes into what you were just saying is there's going to be so much less oxygen in the next few weeks about Biden's age, because everything is going to be focused on the potential or the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, rather than on Biden's age, which was the number one story in media for the last couple of weeks. That will die down now, which is good for Joe Biden. He's going to think he can ride it out into the convention. But there are too many people in the Democratic Party that have taken too hard a stance against the Biden candidacy at this point for that to entirely go away. I think they want to look like, and Democrats are going to realize this in the days ahead, they want to look like they are not going to nominate a leader that is going to bring more chaos. And an aging Joe Biden feels like chaos. It feels like slip-ups at the G7. It feels like, someone's not in charge when you're watching the debate. And I think they're really going to want to have a clear juxtaposition between Donald Trump, and it may take them some days or weeks to come to that conclusion and to realize that they should go in that direction. But that's my position.
And as you say, in the end, money talks. If the donors are moving away and refusing to cough up to pay for the campaign, that is going to exert very significant pressure, isn't it? And yeah, we're left with this conclusion that, horrific as the event was, and as you say, someone lost their life, and that is a huge tragedy for that family, for the Donald Trump campaign and for the future of the country, it puts him in an even stronger position, arguably. Now, you have a choice between a very frail-looking Joe Biden, who doesn't look like he would fight anyone very much, and then this kind of street fighter, Donald Trump. And that's the American politics is a tough business, and you've got to be a fighter to get to the top of it.
One thing I'll be looking for at the convention this week, and as I talk to different delegates and stakeholders in the Republican Party, they were already ready to highlight the kind of everyman that resembled, in fact, the everyman who was killed at the Trump rally, Corey Comparatore. And I expect him to be highlighted immensely, but they already had the leader of the Teamsters, the president of the Teamsters, the mayor of East Palestine, Ohio, where that train derailment just brutalized a small rural community in Ohio that was already disaffected. And so I think this gives them a lot of momentum to make that argument that you have Donald Trump, this sort of unkillable leader who survives an attempted assassination and is the leader of the everyman, is the leader of the real American. This is the argument that I think we're going to see on full display at the convention. This is their test run for making that argument from now until November.
We are going to be sticking with you in the coming days, and as soon as he's made that speech, we're going to get you back to find out, was it a new, changed man, or was the same old Donald still there? We will find out.
Thanks, Freddie.
That was Emily Jashinsky, UnHerd's very own DC correspondent, joining us from UnHerd's newly built studio in the middle of Washington. She is headed off to the Republican convention in Milwaukee, and we'll be hearing from her soon. Until then, thanks for joining. This was UnHerd.